I've got mine. I can't believe that's all we have left. Two different sets of memories, miles apart. The way you're talking, you wouldn't even think we're speaking about the same event. That we'd never been lovers, never been in love, planned a whole future together, laughed, cried in each other's arms. You're talking like you want to arrest me after all these years. I'd like to know what makes your version any more true than mine. Because you're not the only one who knows what happened back then. I know what happened. And I know who we were for each other, what we did together. I haven't forgotten, not in 17 years, even if you have. That's just part of the story. And the people who are leaving are manning phones or people in phones tonight, so I just want you to know that. So what I thought is this is a good time to breathe and stretch and ask some questions. The two pieces that I read so far are full of enough to keep us here for a little while. And if we have time, I'll read something short at the end. If not, we can just talk. So who wants to start? Don't make me start. I saw people taking notes. You either got assigned to this, or you were just so involved you had to take notes. So you want to start with the first piece? Do you remember that? Well, we can start with the second piece. I will start with the second and work backwards. Did you take sides? Tell us. Yeah, you're shaking your head.
I guess so I could really identify with some of the things that you were saying.
Can you speak up a little bit?
I guess I could really identify with some of the things that you were saying. I've never been in that sort of relationship, age-wise. Well, let me repeat that. I guess I might have been taking sides if I would have taken the side of the girl.
Oh.
That's just my opinion.
You want to tell us why?
Because you kept having to defend yourself.
Not me, it's a character.
Okay, I'm
It's
sorry.
It's really important. I thought I heard that the first time. We have to clear this up, right?
Okay, good. I just know the reader kept
That
having
isn't
to-
autobiographical.
The reader kept having to defend themselves. So
That's all right. Uh-huh.
I guess that's why I took the side of the other person.
Of the girl, okay. Well, let's stay on the student for a while. Anybody else on the student? Did you agree with what her accusations? Yes.
No, but that's because I'm an older person. I guess I relate more to the speaker.
Uh-huh.
Yes,
To the teacher, so you,
to the teacher. It's not because I wasn't young,
uh-huh.
but
You didn't hold the teacher accountable?
no, I don't think the teacher's not to blame for anything. Two people just have different views of the same situation. I wouldn't blame the teacher at all.
Okay, so we have completely opposite, some other ideas. Yeah.
It seems like if you have a teacher or sits in a position of power, there's still this quite, right? I mean, in some cases, it might turn out to be the seeker and the woman's having some kind of bad, the other woman's having some bad feelings about
Uh-huh.
it. So, as a general rule, at least it's probably not a good idea to have a relationship like that.
Okay, so you think the teacher was in a position of power?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There's an older person, the teacher, the student.
Okay. Other ideas? Yeah.
I saw the story completely differently. You're talking about it being these roles between the student and the teacher, and I saw it more as the teacher is like she was so repressed because of the way society felt about everything. I mean, it's like she gave up everything that she really felt and how
Mhm.
she was treating the
Mhm.
student. I mean, it could have been anybody,
Mhm.
and they'd be having the same argument.
That's interesting. Okay. So does it matter that the teacher lived in a completely repressive time and wasn't allowed to be herself? Is she less accountable? Somebody else had that, yeah.
Actually, I started feeling for the teacher after she got, talked about the McCarthy era,
Uh-huh.
you know, and how basically I think that the student would probably be more comfortable with that type of relationship than the teacher,
Mhm.
since the teachers have to deal with all that, and probably from some type of religious background where it's not accepted,
Mhm.
definitely not in colleges, and then having to be married at a young age,
Mhm.
don't get to explore, and the student, you know, comes with that experience, and then she's had more time to see different types of
Mhm.
experiences, and she feels comfortable. She had a chance to feel comfortable with lesbianism all her life.
So you didn't hold the teacher accountable.
No.
This is really interesting. If it was a man and a female student, would you feel differently? I see some heads nodding here, yeah?
I would just because, I don't know, if it was a man and then a woman student, that would be
Mhm.
right. Well, I just, because that's I don't know, maybe I'm opinionated, but I feel that, if he's heterosexual to start with, I mean, he could have found anybody,
Mhm.
and being in an authority position like that over somebody, sometimes the younger person feels like they're obligated to do something.
Mhm.
And so I feel that it would have a total different
Mhm.
thing.
Well, good. I mean, remember that this is really important. Does the homophobia matter? Yeah, over here.
What about if it would have been a woman teacher and a male student?
Uh-huh.
You know, because I think that in this society for men, you know, it's like, especially like, you have a teenager who's going out with someone who's in their 20s or even their 30s. It's like the teenage boy is a stud
Mhm.
because of that. And, you know, it's looked on completely different than if it's a man,
Mhm.
you know, in his 30s with a teenage, teenage woman.
Well, these are really good points. The thing with the story is you keep having to sort of deconstruct every layer. And does the fact that the teacher, if it was a woman teacher now that we have gay liberation, and she had access to a gay culture and her peers, would you still have sympathy for her? Would it be okay?
I don't think things in Iowa are really that different.
Really? I guess I'm not moving to Iowa. Back in the back.
I was curious about the rest of the story. Is the rest of the story told from the point of view of the younger woman?
I don't want to give it away. I'm happy to sell you a copy afterwards. I used to be in marketing, but no. There are several other points of view in the story, but I really wanted to try to talk about homophobia and try to understand how it works and how it makes people cross boundaries that we're not supposed to cross. But usually we look at homophobia from a straight perspective, how it makes heterosexual people behave, which is with great fear towards gay people. But how homophobia makes gay people feel is a whole nother question. And so I wanted to offer this section of the story to show you some of the, fictional ideas that I was working with. And I'm still and I know I can, I have this artistic sensibility, I can feel people mulling this over. So I'd really love to hear more about if you had sympathized with the student, if you thought the teacher was, no matter what, out of line. Or if you have questions.
Just, I have two questions. You answered the first one, then I'll tell you why I think
Well, I think there's a lot of different ways of looking at culture. It's the other reason I read this story is because if you remember in the first piece I read, I said that I come from an oral tradition. So I wanted to show you a story that was totally impacted on the fact that I'm a Jew, but that doesn't necessarily have specific Jewish cultural references, but is a very Jewish story because it's completely told. It's what I call a hearing story. And there's a culture that's based on race and ethnicity, which means that people have a language, a history separate from another people, and skin color is a part of that, language is a part of it, food's a part of it. That's one kind of culture. And then there's political cultures that are different, that aren't based on indigenous traits. So,
Because I guess I always hear people say homosexual culture, and it's not something that I've ever believed in.
Okay, well, I'm happy to go into that, but let's stay a few more minutes on either these pieces, and then we can talk about homosexual culture or whether it's not a culture. Any other comments on voices? Did it make you nervous at all? Yeah.
One of the comments, or one of the things that came to my mind when I was hearing the story is, it's some of the character who is speaking in the story seems to be making a lot of excuses.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to be experiencing a great deal of denial.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the reasoning for this, I couldn't help it, reminded me of things that Men Against Rape and Sexism tries to educate men with that idea of you can help it.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose, even though you desire somebody, doesn't mean that you go ahead and act on that desire. It didn't seem so much like an issue of homophobia as it was an issue of the relationship between an older person and a person that's, I don't know, was the character in high school or college? It seemed age inappropriate to form your relationship regardless of gender or affectional preference.
Well, that's a really wonderful comment, and I cannot believe I'm the only one that has a response to that. Does anybody else want to comment to that? Yeah, great.
I have to disagree. I would think that the student is making no excuses than the teacher.
Uh-huh.
To me, it sounded like the teacher was being blamed for the student's life and how it came out.
Uh-huh.
That she was a lesbian, and so she was blaming the teacher for that because of what had happened 17 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that the teacher's gender was important in the sense that because she was a female teacher and because she had this homophobia, but also the sexism in doing her job, that she felt like, and I don't think it's just a justification, that as a female teacher, she saw these female athletes, getting in trouble about sexism, that she also felt maybe that part of her position as a female teacher to help these female athletes was, to introduce them to the school, or just to give them more of a sense of self-worth or support. So I think that does make a difference from it would be a male teacher, coach, and a female, or a male athlete.
Okay. Can I see somebody's hand over here? Yeah.
I just want to clarify, how old was the student? I thought you said junior high.
Yeah, it was junior high. She was 14, 15. Yeah. Definitely. Well, I want to go back to this woman's comment. I'm sorry, I wish I knew your names. It's a fascinating comment because the analysis was comparing domestic abuse and rape, men's responses to their abuse of women. And one of the consequences of what I would call, let's say, women's liberation in quotes, because I put it in quotes meaning it isn't really women's liberation, is that the same standards that are used to apply to men are applied to women equally without any analysis or history. So this character who lived in a time of profound homophobia that she could have been arrested for walking down the street holding another woman's hand. I don't know. I'm raising the question. I don't think you can completely compare her to a straight heterosexual man who has privilege and can do what he wants and can't control himself from hitting a woman. And that one of the ways women hurt each other and men hurt women is to apply the standard without looking at the specifics. And what I am raising in this story is, how different is this character's situation? Do you have sympathy for her? Does it show you what it's like to be in the closet? And what does it mean that the young student was gay anyway? So those are, I'm not, I think you made a really good point, and I think it's really important to keep looking a little deeper at some of it. I know the first thing that I read in the papers now around domestic abuse is, I don't know if you saw it, it was in Ms. about a year ago, lesbian battering. And it was like, okay, now we've gotten to the place where domestic abuse is out in the open, so right away we're going to start with lesbian battering, with no, which of course I completely do not condone or accept, but it was the immediate comparison that it was the same as wife abuse. So what I want to know, is this situation the same as heterosexual sexual abuse or abuse of power? I don't know. That's why I wrote the story. So the other reason I wrote the story is because in lesbian culture, the myth of the gym teacher is a very, now you're listening, it's a very, very big myth. And in my travels, I learned from women that these relationships with gym teachers weren't all they were cracked up to be. And so, and you weren't really allowed to tell those stories because you were breaking the myth of the gym teacher. So, all right, so any more comments on this before we move on, or questions? Yeah, great.
I just have a comment about the audience when you said junior high, and the women obviously older. That's interesting. Obviously, you're all younger than I am. I just find that comment, is your reaction to that comment interesting? Because I guess what I'm trying to say is, are we homophobic against age?
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, put yourself, try and put yourself in the older person's place. And if you met someone younger, much younger, would you approach that person?
I tell you, I'm just 40, and I never thought of myself as an older woman until like last week. And it's really different. So I'm really glad that you said that. I mean, it just changed my perspective completely. So I think the question of age and sexuality is really, what age do you consent, and what do you do if you're an older person, if you consider 40-year-old. Okay, well, a couple more on this and then we'll go on, yeah?
Do you think that maybe the therapist that the student was seeing later could have had an effect on the way she was actually seeing it?
I think it's a really great question. How many of us have been in relationships that at the time we didn't think were abusive, that we thought were equal or wonderful, then we meet somebody we really love, and all of a sudden we get some new awareness on a past relationship? I think that's really perceptive comment. And we don't know again, about these relationships are still going on between teachers and students, and gay teacher-students relationships are 99% have to be completely hidden because the repercussions are so severe. Okay, one more, or any last thing that we haven't, yeah.
I just, the comment she made really interests me, because it's like, I really don't see it as, a homosexual issue.
Uh-huh.
I see it as more getting back into the power,
Mm-hmm.
and it wouldn't matter, it didn't matter that they were lesbians, it wouldn't matter who they were.
Mm-hmm.
There is a taboo that,
Mm-hmm.
junior high school their
Mhm.
students.
That's right.
You know, it doesn't matter how it happens.
Mhm.
You know, that it's verboten, you know, it's.
I think, I'm really glad you were saying this, Anne. I'll just keep saying back that history and plays a very important part in behavior, and I'm not taking sides, and I think what the teacher did then versus if she did it now might be
See, I
really
think
different.
If that was to happen now, it would be just
That's
as.
great. You may be right. You may be absolutely right. All right, well, we're getting a little more into this. All right, a couple more, and then we'll go on, yeah?
I agree with him. It's like, I think it's not so much the power, but a lot of it is the age. I mean, this is the age when the kids are going to be most impressionable. I mean, you're 13 and 14, you are so worried about what your peers are thinking about you, and it's when you're trying to find out who exactly you are, what you want to, what you want to do with your life, who your friends are, who you want your friends to be. And if you have this teacher coming along, trying to seduce you or something,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, whether it be a guy or a girl,
Mhm.
with a guy or a girl, it's still going to, it's going to change the way you think about things completely.
And I don't disagree. I'm kind of surprised that nobody's more sympathetic to the teachers. It's interesting to me. Okay, two more comments. And a couple from people who haven't said anything. How do you feel about the teacher?
I felt she was really stifled. Really felt kind of bad for, especially the response of her husband and having to deal with that in the aftermath. But I would agree that she had more of a sense of responsibility in terms of realizing the level of maturity that the younger student was at, and being conscious and respectful of that student's growth and development. That 13 or 14 may not be. It may be a time where the older woman can help the younger student come to terms with her identity, what that means to be a lesbian, and is that okay, and support the person in that. But in terms of a sexual relationship, for me personally, I don't think that that's appropriate.
Okay, and I see one new hand, yeah? Thank you.
I'm not thinking either side, but I think with dealing with homophobia, it depends on how you define responsibility, and it's been defined by a heterosexual community or heterosexual society. And all that goes along with that, like ageism and sexism and racism, that defines, and it's mostly been a male-dominated society that has defined what is culturally and socially accepted. And why is age the issue here, or why is the homosexuality the issue here? If you look at the bigger scene, it's, for me, I caught on to like the male-dominant heterosexual culture that defines what is reality, or defines what is reality in this story.
I think that's an excellent comment. The only thing I would say in closing my comments on this story is that the idea that the teacher had access to women partners her age is what doesn't exist, whereas a man her age who was straight would have had access to partners, his women partners his own age, and that's. I'm not condoning. I don't want to. The lecture tonight was for teacher-student relationships. No, I keep very strict boundaries, but I do want to be able to look at the effects of homophobia on individuals, and that's what the story is about. So, anybody have a last comment of something that hasn't been touched on? Okay, you get it.
Wow. I would say that, I guess I work in a shelter, and I see how a lot of kids and parents are delayed because of other things in their life. They go emotionally delayed, or I don't know exactly, I know what I mean, I don't know exactly what to say, and I wonder if maybe the teacher was emotionally delayed because she couldn't be who she wanted to be.
Is that a technical term, or is that just something?
That's something I'm
It's
using, I'm sure
beautiful. I
I'm sure
might
there's
use
a
it.
word for
It's beautiful. Emotionally delayed. How many of you are emotionally delayed? I think it's a great comment to end this part of the discussion with. The teacher, and maybe this will help the idea of abuse and power. Teacher was definitely emotionally delayed. And why was she emotionally delayed? Because of the heterosexist, patriarchal, homophobic society that she lived in. And so then, if you look at her guilt or innocence, You have to look at those issues. Great. All right, well, it's about 20 after 9. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the Jewish stuff in the first piece. Do you remember it? Yes, there's a shake head. Well, what I do in the first piece is I talk a lot about my process as a writer and how my identity as a Jew has impacted on it. And that's not something that writers do. We don't share our secrets. We don't expose our thought process. But I decided it was important because both for Jews and non-Jews, there's so much ignorance about Jewish culture. And it was also a way for people to feel, oh, I don't have to be Jewish or know a lot about Jews to read this book. So, any comments about that? If you know, there was a lot about Israel in there, and the Holocaust. Yeah?
I think I agree with a lot of your feelings, it seems like, on the Palestinian situation. I'm wondering, what do you see as any kind of solution? Like, you seem to really condemn the Jews right now. And you see that's kind of pretty pessimistic. Do you see any kind of positive outlook? What do you think? If you just say what's going to make it better and what's going to make the Jews reclaim what you feel like they lost, what would you say?
Well, it's really interesting. I don't know if you caught this, but I think that the story I read you from is also about an occupation. And it's about an occupier and an occupied. If you look at the teacher as the occupier, crossing a forbidden boundary, and you look at the student as the occupied. If you look at Israel as right now the occupier and the Palestinians as the occupied, I think that when you've been hurt, the way the Holocaust hurt Jews, and that the State of Israel was founded by survivors of the Holocaust, just like this teacher grew up in a homophobic society. How do we, my real answer to your question is with another question. How do you stop the cycle of violence and abuse that's been perpetrated on you? How do you not do it to the next person? And what Israelis are going to need in order to stop occupying is to feel safe and not to feel that they're going to be destroyed if they stop occupying. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I see it all as related. You had something about the first piece?
You mentioned becoming a vegetarian and losing part of that culture in that decision. I was wondering if you could comment on things that maybe you felt of your culture that have been taken from you, that you feel you could get back, and if there's something to change.
Well, one of the things today when I was talking to somebody, it was really interesting in the discussion, we were talking about cultures, and I said, oh, well, this is anti-Semitic. And the person said to me, what's that? And I thought, okay, this couldn't be possibly happening to me. And, we won't take a poll of how many people here know what anti-Semitism, but I think that one of the consequences for a specific group of Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, Jews from Eastern European, is that our skin is fair skin, and so our identity as Jews in this country has been reduced to a religion, not a culture. And so what makes it safe for Anglos, Gentiles, and all peoples of color is not to see our ethnicity, but only say, oh, that's a religion. It's the opposite of Christianity, so we don't need to deal with that. That's what happens all the time. And so what happens is, if you're Jewish, you begin to feel psychically confused. It's just a baseline. And so I feel like I go through the world, almost with badminton, swats, first the homophobia, then the anti-Semitism. And by the time I'm done, I'm just exhausted. So one of the things I think is taking back language. When I was surrounded, I don't know how many of you are in the throes of vegetarianism. But where I live, the lesbians were really big on brown rice, tofu, and I don't know, really heavy grains. And none of it was like what I grew up with. You know, I grew up with chicken, and potatoes. So I had a really impossible time. If being a lesbian was synonymous with being a vegetarian, it just didn't work. So I just decided that, and I've heard this from my women of color friends, specifically my African American women friends, that like giving up meat or chicken specifically takes them too far away from their roots. And so I just decided that I didn't care if I was a living contradiction. I was anyway. So what did a little chicken matter? So anyway, I really think that we as Jews need to take back lots of cultural aspects. Most of the people I travel all over the country, they couldn't name 5 Jewish holidays on one hand. They couldn't name the languages of the Jews. There's like, you know, and it isn't just about Jews they couldn't, but it's about every other culture, but it's how it affects me personally. And what it does is, it's like when everyone thinks you're straight. You go through the world constantly trying to be centered, and it really throws you off balance.
When you say trying to be centered, you mean trying to be balanced? What's that?
Well, I try not to go through the world feeling emotionally delayed. I don't mean but it feels like when you're... I travel on the plane all the time, and these lovely businessmen sit next to me, and they always want to buy me a drink, and they assume I want to talk to them, and they assume I'm straight. It doesn't matter how I spike my hair. Then they, you know, it just doesn't matter what I do, you know? And all I can tell you is that really delays me from having any feeling whatsoever. And then, when somebody says, anti-Semitism, what's that? Then I feel totally crazy. I mean, I feel like immediately obliterated from the face of the earth. So I think the challenge for those of us who participate in multiculturals is to keep both feet on the ground all the time. It's a very big challenge. And it's one of the things that my stories deal with. All of them, all the characters have forms of multiple identities, you know, and they wrestle with all of it. About a few more questions about the Jewish stuff. One of the things that's really interesting is that it's very, very hard. It's very easy for audiences to talk about the gay stuff. This is a good example of what you're talking about. It's much harder to talk about the Jewish stuff. And it's almost because our awareness around gay issues has at least been raised, quarter of an inch, would you say? Is that too high? An eighth, maybe? But Jewish, forget, I'm from Ohio, you know, and I could tell you stories about what it was like to grow up Jewish in Ohio. You know, there were like 5 of us. You know, that was it. I'm still in recovery from Dayton. So, any questions about? Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts in my head, but I was raised more in a Jewish household, and I feel like I've assimilated so much of my culture. I have almost no Jewish identity left when I sit with my grandmother, and she's talking Yiddish with my father. Due to 1 year of German, I might be able to pick up on a little of it, but not much. And it's just it's a really strange thing because I work with some of the people in the LGBA office downstairs, and so in a lot of my classes, I'm a heterosexual, and I'm continually educating as much as I can on that. And I think part of it is because they can be both so closeted that you can really disappear if you want to. And it makes me so angry that I can disappear from being Jewish. That I think a lot of times, even in classes, I get people who think that I'm a lesbian and then discriminate against me for that because I'm speaking up. So then I'm kind of putting myself in double jeopardy when I do this. You know, not only am I having to combat people who say that this is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard, and I was telling JL
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you said that. And two things that come to my mind is one of the tensions between people of color and Ashkenazi Jews, because there's Sephardic Jews who are olive-skinned, there's Mizrahi Jews who are dark-skinned, and Jews from Africa who the whole, Beta Israel, who have the whole range of color, is that because we can pass, then it's as though we don't have to have the oppression of anti-Semitism. But what gets lost in that is how not being seen affects us from becoming whole people and living with a whole heart. And you can't ever go completely, it's sort of like if you're gay but you pretend you're straight, you can't ever be whole. So to acknowledge your assimilation is a brave risk, and I really appreciate that you did that. And I think that whenever, it's really interesting that you get targeted for speaking up. It's one of the ways Jews get targeted, or one of the ways that anti-Semitism works, is we come from an oral tradition. So you may not have assimilated as much as you think because you speak up. That was a cultural ritual. That's a gift. It's something that when I'm with my Gentile friends, in fact, I had a Gentile lover, and I was always saying, say something, and it was like, I could talk for both of us, So I think you carry more cultural behaviors than you realize, but what you may not have is the knowledge, and you may not be around people who see you for who you are, and so the shame just becomes enormous. Did somebody else want to try to say something, other comment? I do think that the oppressions of anti-Semitism and homophobia are very similar at times because you can't tell by looking, even though straight people swear they can, But, the question of passing is a very big question. So, any other comments? Well, I think it's a little late to read a little more. So I'm happy to talk to you personally. I'd love to. And I'm happy to sign books that I think Stephen's selling them outside, and I'll be, bring them in and come to me and come talk to me. Thank you very, very much.